Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Caroline Taylor, who is going to be our presenter, along with Vanessa Rose, who's going to be there as well. Both of them are experienced funding specialists and especially working with the Arts Council as well. And they've both been involved in writing the first round of these grants. So, so over to you, Caroline. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. What I'll do first is I'll share the screen, share the presentation and with everybody. Okay. So first of all, welcome from myself and Vanessa. As Nick has introduced us, we're both funding specialists. For me, I have been working in the sector for too long for me to declare to you or disclose, but I've raised many millions of pounds, both from Heritage Lottery Fund, Big Lottery Fund, but also more recently from the Arts Council. And the Arts Council, as you may well be aware, has a very particular way of asking you about the funding opportunities and getting you to apply for it. First round CRF applications, we made those, and the majority of them were successful. And I say the majority because it is a hugely competitive pot of money. I also did some emergency funding applications for not-for-profit organisations for the very first tranche of money, which the commercial sector was kept away from, but also have done things like national portfolio for organisations for some of the big museums and secured funding from them. Vanessa, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm the Executive Director of Cultivate, but like Caroline, recently I've been working mostly with clients, many of whom have made applications and successfully to the CRF funding from the Arts Council, but who are also on other programs. My background is in theatre predominantly, but I have actually had connections with the production side because my ex-husband was a producer for Edinburgh International Festival and children who work in the event industry. So I understand the significance and importance of the sector that you all provide.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take you through and give you some headline details on the programme. There is a lot of information that is provided on the Arts Council website. So if anybody wants to know anything more, wants further detail, there is a whole series of frequently asked questions. There's a whole series on each of the specific areas that they talk about to give you a little bit more detail from there. Please go ahead and see that. There are also copies of three of the 4 webinars that they've held, which explain and explore the programme in more detail. The only thing that I would say about that is that the majority of participants on those webinars have been from the not-for-profit sector. So a lot of the questions that people have been asking for you are probably going to be unfamiliar to you. It's territory that you don't sit in. So that's why we've been working, Vanessa and I, with PLASA to bring this to you. Okay, let's get on with this a moment in time. Otherwise, all of that money that's available through the Cultural Recovery Fund will have been given out. Okay, background to the programme. You may remember that last year, after some significant pressure from the events, cultural and heritage organisations, the government finally announced a programme of £1.57 billion of funding support to protect the sector, the cultural arts, heritage and cultural sector, to ensure that it could survive, because at that point we were very unclear about what was going to happen with regards the pandemic. The majority of that money was given out in a first round of cultural recovery monies, which ran for the period October 20 to the end of March this financial year. Some of it was given out by way of grant, some of it was given out by way of loan, but the England Arts Council's branch held back a pot of money which they have now made available. They made it available on the 23rd of December. And the timing of the guidance that they've put out reflects the position on the 23rd of December it unfortunately did not anticipate that on the 26th of December, we were going to go into a national lockdown again. So you need to bear that in mind. But this round, there is £250 million of funding available, and it is grant funding. There was also some cultural monies that came out by way of loan financing, but that programme closed in early January. So if you didn't make an application for that, you have, at the moment in time, you have missed that funding. This programme, the grants, and they are grants that are given out to organisations, and they are not going to be called back, opened on the 6th of January, and the applications close on 26th of January at 12 noon. That means you have to have your application in by 12 noon into the Grantium portal, the Arts Council portal, where they accept those applications. I think it's really important to understand that what we're looking to do and what Arts Council are looking to do with this round of funding is to support organisations as they transition to become viable and sustainable, to continue with a viable and sustainable operating model during the period April, May and June of the next financial year, 2021, so April of this year. The previous round of funding was really about helping organisations survive. So in that point in time, it was, what do you need to do to keep going, to actually keep the organisation alive? This round of funding is saying, what do you need to do for that short period of time to transition to some form of reopening? The guidance that Arts Council are working on is that as from 1st of July of this year, that we will be back in a situation where the majority of venues, the majority of cultural events, the majority of arts happenings will be going ahead. Whether or not that's what happens and that actually takes place, we wait to see. This round of funding has a minimum grant level, and a minimum grant level you have to go in and ask for at least 25,000. The maximum grant level has been pegged for commercial companies at a maximum level of £1 million. If, as an organisation, you received funding during the first round and you received 500,000 in the first round, then your maximum in this round is pegged to 500,000. You can only hold £1 million as the total amount. And it's really clear that what this money is about is not just monies just for you to have, it is to cover the losses between your income and your operating costs for that period, April, May and June. It is we are expecting that during that period that venues, the assumption behind the funding is that venues will start to open, that activity will start to take off again, that your type of supplier, supporter organisations will start to trade actively again if you haven't been able to do so in the period April, May and June. It may be that you start off relatively small scale in April, you grow a bit more in May and a little bit more in June. The assumption being behind all of this is that by July 2021, we will be back to not the normal, not what we did before, but the new normal, what we think will happen in the new future. So it accepts and understands that there will still be some restrictions. There could be things like, so we might be still having to wear masks within a public venue. It may well be that we're continuing to maintain social distancing. But the assumption behind the programme is that we will be back up and running by July. And this is about saying, if you have a gap between your income and your expenditure in April, May and June, this grant funding can help you meet that. We've put there that what that means is ACE does not expect that this will be in excess of 25% of your pre-COVID turnover. The amount that you can apply for will be pegged at 25%. So if in pre-COVID times your turnover was £500,000, then the assumption behind the programme is that your costs are likely to be in the region of 125,000, and that would be the maximum level that they would look to fund you to. So if you suddenly went in with a grant and said, actually, we're now going to spend £250,000 in that first quarter, they will say that's just not likely to happen. That doesn't reflect the previous picture of how the business operated. It is unlikely to reflect how the business will operate moving forward. So what we have to bear in mind is that's the kind of the figure that we're looking for. It is not about a grant for anything and everything. It's about keeping you, getting you back to business and back to full operation. One of the things, and this is one of the areas that's causing a huge amount of debate and discussion particularly amongst the commercial organisations that sit within the arts and cultural sector. ACE will expect, as part of the application process, there is an application form that you need to fill in, and it asks you a number of questions which we will come to in a moment in time. But one of those questions is around what you have done during the pandemic to actually ensure that the business survives. And one of the things that ACE is aware of is that for a large number of commercial firms, they may have made use of the CBILS or the bounce back loans. Not everybody has. Some people have, some people have chosen not to take those out. They will expect you to have explain what you've done in relation to taking those two loans out. And I'll touch on that when we come to it later on in the presentation. But what they want to know is that you have shown that you as a business have done everything that you can from there to keep this business going. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, as I say, when we get to that particular question from there. So what they will expect from you is information about any government support that you might have had. So you might have qualified for the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Grant. I know some people did, some people didn't, depending on how you operate. Some people might have had the rates rebate from the local authority. Again, lots of firms are operating in premises that sit above the 51,000, so weren't eligible from there. There is a question here as well about ACE asking to understand the position of the cash reserves within the business. And we will touch on that when we get further down, when we talk about that first question, because for you as a business, it is perfectly legitimate and perfectly reasonable that any business would sit with cash sitting within the business, because you are looking for that rainy day. Nobody knows what's around the corner. And I think this has really shown to all of us, none of us knew what was really around this corner. But you will be asked to demonstrate and talk about what you have done in relation to keeping your business going. Eligibility, briefly and quickly, we have checked. Last time round, I know on the first round, there was a huge amount of disappointment because sector-specific support organisations such as you, some people were told after contacting ACE that they weren't eligible, and then all of a sudden they were allowed to go forward. Some people didn't make applications because they didn't feel that they were eligible, but then found out that competitors or collaborators or other organisations that they work with had gone forward. You are eligible to go forward because you provide, I suppose the thing we would say is you provide that hugely essential foundation block. Without you, I could be the best performer in the world, but if I don't have a good stage, good lighting, I'm getting nowhere. You people make these events happen and are a key part of the sector. You have to be a limited company. There are some rules within the Arts Council guidance about being a limited company. You can operate as a single director holding a company, but it has to be through a company structure. If you operate as a sole trader, you are not eligible, and you are not eligible if you operate as a freelancer as a sole trader, but you are if you operate via a company structure from there on in. Subsidiary companies of wider companies can apply. The difference this time round is that the application must come from the parent company, but the information must be written about the individual company that is asking for the grant. So if you are owned by a big conglomerate, it is their name that goes on the application form, but it is your information that talks about your financial needs and what you will do with the money. Key thing, you need to be able to demonstrate at least 2 years worth of accounts logged with Companies House at the 6th of January 2021. There are a number of exceptions. So for example, if during the time you've changed your company structure or you've merged in a response particularly to the pandemic, then there will be changes there that if you can demonstrate that that's what's happened, then you will be able to still go ahead and make an application. If you've only submitted draft account, provided they are prepared, ready to go, then that will mean that you're eligible. If you had 1 year of accounts registered, but you hadn't got your second year of accounts, but they're ready in draft form, then you can go forward from there. But if you haven't got 2 years of accounts, you will not get through and not be eligible. As I've said before, the real purpose of the grant is to cover the shortfall between your operating costs and your income in the period April, May and June 2021. The key question that I think for you, and lots of organisations are saying it, is that our current financial year's figures do not reflect the state of the business that we were in before COVID. So if we use the amount of income we've got this year, if we use the amount of expenditure we've had this year, it really doesn't reflect the real situation. So what you need to be doing is you need to be looking at your previous, your last post-COVID normal year of operation and use that as your guide. That's your, what did we used to do? Where did we expect income would come from? And look at it in relation to where you expect income coming in during this particular year that we're going into. And I talk in years because some companies have a different financial year. My financial year is April to March from there. The things that you can apply for are some of those things that are listed there, and they are things like overheads. So you can apply for rent, you can apply for utilities, you can apply for broadband, you can apply for all of those costs that you have in terms of your property. You can include things like insurance. So if you've got insurance on your main office unit and then a storage unit, you can also include that. You can include funding to bring back any staffing. Now, they may well be staffing that you've got laid out on the furlough scheme. Obviously, at the moment in time, furlough extends until the end of April, but you could include those costs if you intend to bring them back for May and June. You might choose that you have to rehire new staff. So you have to bring in different people to do different things because the situation has changed somewhat from what was happening previously. You can apply for money to bring in contractors or freelancers to carry out work that you plan to do or to carry out areas of activity that you might choose not to bring back. You might have restructured the business or made redundancies, so you might choose to bring in a freelancer or a contractor rather than bringing back a permanent member of staff, because as you will appreciate, it's a very changeable world in where we're operating at the moment. You can apply for money to support what Arts Council describe as your artistic programming costs. For you, it's about doing the work that you do normally. So it is about, for example, if you are a festival and what you do is you book venues that other performers then perform at, but you organise all the venues. Your artistic programming costs are the costs of actually hiring those venues from there. So you can include those costs within your application. You can put in for some level of CapEx, and CapEx is really limited because it's about essential CapEx that enables you to deliver your business in this new environment that we're operating in from there on in. So you couldn't go out and say, we need a new vehicle, we're going to go and buy a new vehicle, we need a new X or Y, we're going to buy that, unless it is absolutely essential to the operation of the business. But any capital expenditure that you choose to put in your bid is limited to 10% of the bid. So you can't purchase things that will fall well and truly outside of the period of April, May and June. You can use the money to repay some COVID related debts. So and these debts can go back to the 1st of October 2020. So if what you've done is you have had and met expenditure within that period, so you are this festival booking company and you hire venues. You hired venues on the understanding that your event would go ahead and it was since cancelled, but you hired them in that period from October the 1st up until essentially the end of this financial year, March the 31st, you can include that as a debt and ask for that to be repaid back. What you can't do though, is you can't say we have a CBIL or a bounce back and we'd like to pay back that using the money from Arts Council, because both CBIL and bounce back were government funded, and Arts Council money is essentially government money coming channeled via the Arts Council. So it would be government paying government. So you can't include the costs of repaying any of those loans in your work. The other thing that you can put in for is up to 8 weeks contribution towards rebuilding your reserves. So what you do on that front is you take your turnover, you divide it down and you divide and get the figure for 8 weeks, which is essentially 2 months worth of turnover, and you can ask them for a contribution of that towards your reserves, because Arts Council recognise that a one-off injection of cash may be good, but actually you might have depleted your reserves quite significantly over the period. As I've said before, what you can't include is and this is only some of the things. So again, if you are making an application, there is really clear guidance on the Arts Council website. You can't include operating costs outside the period. So those are either historic operating costs or future operating costs that fall outside that window of April, May and June. There are some things that you can include that fall outside the period of April, May and June. And this is where with Arts Council, they say you can't include this, but then they say, but you can include that. So for example, your festival booker is booking venues for this year's festival that is going to take place in October of 2021. And normally in their normal year of operation pre-COVID, at this point in time that we're talking about in April, May and June, they would have been reserving and paying for deposits on hire of space. So those are legitimate costs that they can say, we've previously paid these at this point in time. We fully expect everything to be going ahead for the festival in October, so we need to reserve these venues now, knowing that they are not going to come into play and be used until much later in the period. But what you will have to do is you will have to have proof that you have booked those venues. So for example, in that instance, it would be a contract that you've had, and that level of expenditure that you've allocated to that can be paid after the grant period, because you've actually said, yep, this is what we're going to pay it off in future. You can't use the funding to pay off historic debt. So if you have a historic debt within the business, you cannot use any of the grant funding to pay that off. And as I say, you can't use costs that have been covered by other funding. So if you've paid and are paying for costs through your CBIL, you can't then claim back and say you're going to use that to pay that as well using your grant funding, because you've already found a source of how you're going to pay that off. And input VAT reclaimable from HMRC, you cannot claim that. The process, I know this is a huge amount of information, and I am aware that for many of you, the kind of Grantium and the Arts Council may be quite an unknown body. The Arts Council have their own grants portal. Everything that you do when you apply for this grant, you apply online. What you need to do is go to the Arts Council website, and on there it says there a section there about funding, and in the funding section there is a section there about setting up an applicant profile on Grantium. Essentially what you're doing is you're getting your name onto the Arts Council website, so onto the database, so you can then go ahead and make your application. The thing to bear in mind, you have to first of all register some information about the company, give some company details, talk about the company structure, and put some information up onto the Arts Council website. They then look at it and say, yep, we think you are a bona fide company. We will validate your profile. We will allow you to make an application. And you have to do that by Thursday, the 21st of January. So next Thursday by 5 o'clock, you have to have made your application, because that will give them a couple of days to actually validate it before the grant programme ends on the 26th. So if you are thinking of doing anything, and if you are thinking of putting in an application, then you need to go on Grantium as soon as possible and set yourself up an application profile. As I've reiterated before, applications must be in by the 26th of January, so that's a week on Tuesday, so it is an incredibly tight timetable. Decisions are expected by the end of March. They are hoping to roll them out. It will literally be by the end of March that you will hear. Last time round, the majority of people heard on the final day before the money became available for everybody from there on in. When they come to look at how they're going to allocate the money, lots of people are wondering how they do that. They will look at the geographic spread. Arts Council is divided into various regions. So there is the West Midlands region, the North West region, and what they're under some considerable scrutiny is to ensure that all of the regions get a reasonable share of the money, so that not all of the money sits within those companies, businesses and cultural assets that sit within London or the South East, that if you lived within the North West, that some of the money would come back to your area. So they're going to use a geographic spread. They are looking at a range of art forms. So as well as you as sector support organisations putting in, all of the cultural organisations that exist within the UK, within England, sorry, are eligible to put in for this grant if they wish. So that is museums, that's art galleries, that's art centres. There are a couple of exceptions, but everybody who is part of the arts and culture network can, in the main, can access this grant from there. They're going to look at the size and type, because some organisations are very, very large, some organisations are very small. But there are two key points that we'll come on to slightly later in the presentation. What they're looking at is they're wanting to ensure that the money goes to a range of different organisations, so diversity. So whether they are BAME organisations, so Black and minority ethnic organisations, whether they're organisations that support and deliver services to people with a disability, whether they're organisations that work in communities where there is very little cultural activity going on. So diversity is a key area for the Arts Council. The other area is that they are wanting to ensure that all of those organisations that receive a grant have cultural significance, and that is one of the points that we will come to later on in the presentation about what they mean by cultural significance. They want to ensure that the brand that we have, the UK has a huge reputation as being a cultural provider of all sorts, whether it's of skills, of knowledge, of expertise, whether it's in terms of some of the best companies, creative companies housed within the UK. It's about ensuring that that continues after the pandemic. The application form. It'll ask you for there are some very general questions about you and the company, about where you're located, about what you do, a brief kind of, the elevator pitch about we are the largest company who provides staging equipment throughout the UK and beyond. And then there are 6 questions, and I'm going to briefly run through the first 4, and then my colleague Vanessa is going to come in and talk to you a little bit about one of the other questions, question 5. So as I've said, the first question that they want to know is, how have you managed the impact of the pandemic? What's happened to your business during this period? And the second part of that question, why are you unable to transition to viability, sustainability without support? So what they want to know is, what's happened? What have you done during the pandemic to make changes to the way that you've operated? So it could well be that you've made use, as we said earlier, of some of the business grants that have been made available. It could have been that you've applied or were offered the rates rebate. It could be that you've taken out a commercial loan. It could be that one of the decisions you took was to dispose of property or equipment, business property and equipment, to liquidate cash. It could be that you've had to furlough the staff, change the structure of the staff, change the business model of operation to ensure that you survive. So what they want from you there is some real clear figures about what has happened. And a lot of that will be figures and information that demonstrates that you have suffered during the impact of the pandemic and you have made steps to ensure that you survive. What they want to know is that having survived the last several months, that if they give you money for the 3 months for April, May and June, you have a real good chance of actually coming out the pandemic in a reasonable state. One of the questions that will inevitably be asked here in this section is they ask you on the form to detail the level of reserves. Now, the questions are written in such a way, because the Arts Council predominantly works with the not-for-profit sector, the questions are written in a way that you are, for example, an arts project that gets some of its money from the Arts Council, it gets some of its money from grants from trusts and foundations. And when they give you a grant of money, they will sometimes reserve that money and say you can only use it for X, Y and Z cost. So when they talk about reserves, they're wanting to know what level of cash there is in the business. And one of the questions and one of the assessment criteria that they will use is if you have a level of cash reserve within the business, and I will say this, and this will be a controversial point, that is deemed to be excessively high, one of the things that they will assess that on is why then should the public purse, which is what this grant funding is, why then should the public purse come in and give you money? Now, that's controversial on all sorts of reasons, because every business has the right to reserve cash within there for the rainy day. This is the rainy day. You've worked hard, you've allocated that money, you're saving it because you want to do things in the future and you want to have some capital to be able to do that with from there. But one of the things that they are going to look at is the level of reserves that you hold. And one of the key questions they would ask is, when they're assessing the bid, you've asked us for £250,000, but you hold £750,000 on reserve. The question would be, why? Why would we give you money? Why should we give you money? Why ought we give you money? And you know, there are all sorts of answers to that, and we will all have our own views on that. But it is about the fact that they are tasked with giving out public money. So that is a key question. So if you hold reserves within your business, you will have to, in that first question, explain why and what they are for. Now, they may well be for purposes, you may well be about to complete on the purchase of a new business property. You may well be about to buy a new fleet of vehicles you may well have taken out, or be about to purchase a whole raft, or were before the COVID crisis to purchase a whole raft of equipment. So if there is a viable, if there's a reasonable reason why, then make sure that is in your application if you're going to put an application in, because it will be one of the assessment criteria. The other side of it that they will look at is that, for example, if you've had a CBIL or a bounce back, some people have had their CBIL and they have spent it. So the money came in, they converted it, and they converted their equipment that was on hire, that they were on hire purchase, they converted it to cash, bought it outright. So the business now owns it. Some people will have had a CBIL and will have spent some of the money, but not all of the money. And they will be using that money over the next few months, as they have previously, to pay off debts or to keep the business going. Other people will have had access to a CBIL or a bounce back loan and will have taken it out and kept it for a rainy day. It would have joined their rainy day fund. It will be sitting there within their rainy day fund. And one of the questions that Arts Council will ask and will consider when they're assessing your application, they will ask it, the assessment panel will ask it and say, this person is sitting on £150,000 loan, a CBIL, but they're asking for £225,000 worth of grant funding, free monies. Can we give that to this organisation? Should we give that to this organisation? And I know again that is a really difficult point for you all to hear, because you will have heard in the first round there are a significant number of organisations within this support sector that got very large grants. There are a few that got very large grants. There are a number of them that got significant grants. So you might think to yourself, well, X competitor down the road got a grant last time round, so I should have one. The Arts Council way of looking at it is that this is government money, this is public purse money, it comes from all of us. And I suppose the kind of thing to think about at the next stage is we will be paying for this through taxes. We will be putting back in any of the money that the government has used and is using to support us. So if you think of it like that, the word from the Arts Council is, if you need the money to ensure that you're viable and sustainable during that period of time, then apply for a grant. If you don't need the money, then don't. And the decision will rest with each and individual business. Some businesses will clearly say, we need the money, we can show we need the money, we will go ahead and make an application. Other businesses will sit and think, do you know, we don't actually really need the money. We would love to have the money. Don't get me wrong. I know entirely that most businesses would love to have the money because it's going to just go into the coffers. But the question has to be, is do we need it? And that's what Arts Council will be looking at, is do you need it when they're looking at all of the applications that they've had from there? So that's the first question. And that's the question that has proved the most difficult, because Arts Council, I have to say, in their information and the webinars and the written information that they've given out on the website, they are not really addressing that question, because, and I think it comes from the fact that they're quite unfamiliar with the idea of commercial companies coming in and receiving their funding in any way. I think, to be fair as well, the other side of the argument is that this programme was put together at very short notice to respond to the changes in the pandemic. So there is a little bit of thinking that they still have got to do on that. But that's one of the key questions from there. The second question, I think that's really easy for all of you to answer, is how will you use the money? So what you have to detail there is, what are you actually wanting to do with that money during the time? What are you going to spend that money on? And again, one of the things that you will need to reflect in that is the changes that we think will happen. So if we imagine, and don't forget Arts Council are working on the basis that on the 1st of July, it all becomes back to a new normal. Even though we all know that that may not happen, that's the planning and that's the thinking that we're looking at doing. So what they're looking for you to do is tell them how you're going to use that money to get back to that new normal. So what you need to talk about there is what you're going to do in terms of what you're going to spend the money on first and foremost. Don't spend too much time on telling that, because that is all in the accompanying spreadsheets that follow it, but give the reasons and the rationale behind the decisions that you've taken as to why you're doing what you're doing at this particular point in time. The third question says, how will you adapt your plans if restrictions don't ease? So everything carries on as it is. The R rate rockets back up again. We're all in another lockdown come April 2021. We hadn't seen it coming, but there we are. That's what happens. So what would your business do if that was the situation? What will you do then? Will you carry on with your plan as you've written it down? Will you rethink it? Will you try something else? Will you simply shut the business down again, mothball it for a period of time, and then reopen at the other end? You will all have a very different response to that. But what you need to think about and put in the application is, what will you do if this situation continues even further? And I'm no doubt that all of you as business owners will already be thinking about that. How long is this going on for? What are we going to do? And the final bit is about how you ensure that your business is viable and sustainable after the period of the funding, and the period ends June of this year. So how will you ensure that your business is viable and sustainable? And really what they're asking for there is how you manage risk within the business. It is a very short set of words that you have to respond to the question. All of these questions, the first two, you have roughly 600 words to respond to each of those questions. So 600 words for question 1, 600 for question 2. For question 3 and 4, you have 350 words. That's what it states on the form, but the actual Arts Council applications work on a character count, and it isn't actually 350 words. How number of times you will find yourself re-editing and drafting down and removing stuff from there. It's more like 250 words that you have to explain your answers to question 3 and question 4. Brevity is everything. Wherever you can, don't put anything in that you don't need. Don't put a dash in, don't put a dot in, don't put any kind of punctuation. Just literally the simple words and numbers. The fewer the better that you can get in there. But it's got to tell your case and tell your story. So those are the 4 questions. And I think for most of you as business owners, those are going to be things that you're already thinking about. You know, you've lived the story, you've lived question 1, you know what's happened with it. Question 2, you've got ideas about what you need the money for. Question 3, you are already thinking about what's going to happen what happens if we don't reopen. And question 4, risk management, financial management, ensuring that the business operates in a profitable way and ensuring that it's on track is something that you will do probably several times a day. You'll stop and think about what's happening. So those are relatively easy for you to answer. The next question I'm going to hand over to Vanessa, and this is where it's Arts Council language that comes to play.
Hi, there is a question in there about cultural significance, and I think for a lot of people who have what we would call suppliers, artists, and organizations such as you, this has been quite a difficult one because they're not actually presenting the creative work. But I think this is where it's important to realize the significance that your sector plays in that creative process and in developing, in many areas, access to audiences that would not normally necessarily be attending buildings or attending events unless there was a significant input from the very sector you work in. So I think what's important when you answer this question is to look at the work that you've been doing and the creativity area with organizations. So for instance, dance companies, music, outdoor events in particular around all of these lighting installations, son and lumière, opening up areas of heritage and cities, urban, where your input has been critical in terms of developing that cultural engagement that they'll be looking for. The other area they ask for in this question, there's a 2-part section here, an A or a B, and they say you can either answer just A or you can answer B or you can do both. The second part is about your significance within the community in which you are based. Now that could be that you offer employment or apprenticeships on a creative level, which is within your organization, or that you have a particular partnership or engagement with the community in which you are based, which could be the provision of lighting and sound on a much more local basis rather than a national or international. So you can actually answer both parts if you so wish, but it's about actually seeing where your contribution has been critical. So one of the questions we got at the last session was about launches and awards ceremonies. If your contribution is, for instance, with a dance contribution to such an event, or music or art, and where your significant input is with that organization. And that is very much a cultural significance. So it's about seeing where the work meets those needs. If you're purely commercial, it's unlikely you would be able to show that. But if you've done any work which is about perhaps some lighting events or installations where that has been around a heritage site, or with a major building or an organization such as an orchestra or a band or a dance company, and acting. And the other area which I think is important is the huge contribution you're now making to the amount of digital output that arts organizations are having to consider, very much not just part of COVID, but for the future. The Arts Council is very much looking at how arts organizations, cultural organizations can be far more accessible to audiences through digital output. Now, clearly, the sound, the lighting, the technical expertise made in ensuring that these are good quality and high quality is critical to the success of how people will engage with that. So I think it's about not being too concerned that this question is, well, I don't do the creative bit, but I am behind the scenes. Absolutely critical in how that is presented and the quality of which it is seen by audiences, both locally, nationally, and internationally. Caroline, can I hand back to you for diversity?
Okay, the only thing I'd say in relation to that point, that particular question, is if you've got particular partners that you work with, and some of those are some of the household names amongst the cultural offers. So say, for example, you provide, your facilities go into Tate Britain. So you are providing the lighting installations and the sound installations at every single Tate Britain opening that takes place, or during every single exhibition. You are providing a key part of the role in terms of working with Tate Modern. Those are the kind of names where actually they are nationally significant players within the market. People have heard of them. So yes, you are going to be, by the fact that you're pairing with a partner like that, you are going to exist and benefit from their reputation, but your reputation is also there, because they couldn't get their reputation without some of the background work that you all helped to provide. So make sure that goes in there. The other thing is, if you've got anything like if you've won any awards. Now, the industry awards, yes, are fine, but if you've won any awards that have some credence and credibility, again, if you want to include those, they demonstrate that within the field, you are potentially one of the leading players from there. So one of the examples we spoke about earlier was with it can work at the very local level. So key role in providing cultural opportunity. You provide the lighting, the sound at the local Bolton Mellor every single year. Now the Bolton Mellor attracts a community of families. It's a family audience. And that family audience may not go to any of the other cultural offers within the town or within the area, within the Northwest region. They may see that as their primary output from there. So you are helping bring arts and culture to that kind of demographic. Likewise, you might find that you are providing the staging, the sound and the equipment at Glyndebourne. Glyndebourne has an international reputation. It attracts an audience from all around the world and across the UK. So again, what you are providing is you're providing cultural opportunity for people. And think about it in terms of brand PLC, Britain PLC, Creative Nation. What we do is we trade internationally off our reputation. So where we sit is about, you come to Britain because you want a creative experience. We have the best creatives, some of the most talented creatives. So if you're sitting and working within the national or the international field, they're the kind of things that's why you are important. It is important that you continue and are viable as a business as we move forward, because you are plugging that gap from there. If one of the things is that one of your key competitors in the market has gone bump during this horrible period, it's an awful thing to say, but we are aware that some of them have gone under. If it's limited down the amount of availability of the talent, skill or particular expertise you have, if you go as well, then that means the arts and cultural sector is going to really find it difficult to experience and bring forward. The other thing is thinking about the partners that you work with. So if you work with museums, if you work with heritage sites, what role do you play in ensuring that they can raise the funding that they need to keep themselves open? So if you're providing lighting or sound installations to several of the local heritage attractions within your area, each of those nights when they're open, so for example in the run up to Christmas, last year lots of organisations ran light shows and attracted large numbers of people, partly because people had very little else to do, so we were kind of desperate for things to go out. But each of those participants that went along, each of those audience members would have paid a fee to have gone in, and every entrance fee that they've paid, some of that money would have gone back to supporting that cultural organisation or that heritage organisation to keep running. So again, what you are doing is providing services, backroom services, but they are essential to the cultural ecology of the area. So there needs to be a range of things for people to do, and you provide part of that. And in doing that, you help organisations, not-for-profit organisations, keep generating the money they need to have to keep going. So it's that you are part of that virtuous circle from there. So try and think as broad as you can. Think in terms of what sort of audiences come to the event. Do they go to lots of other things, or are they the kind of events that only attracts, this is the only time when that kind of that audience will come out and actually stand on the street and watch that street festival that goes ahead. You play a critical role in this. Think of it at the other end in terms of what's the gross value added that you put back into the economy. The fact that you might be supplying a touring venue with sound and equipment. Rock tourism, for example, is one of our key areas in terms of income generation, in terms of tourists. Tourists come from all over to actually attend concerts, venues, gigs in some of our cultural settings within the UK. If you're part of it, tell us about it. Make sure that you are selling where you sit. You are not simply the provider of equipment. You are the bit that makes the events happen. You really do bring those events alive. You might be a particular creative company and you might be bringing forward new ideas. It could be that you're trialing something in terms of new technology, and it's really important that you actually are able to continue to be able to bring that to the forefront, because that, again, if you bring out the next new thing in technology, or you're working on bringing that out, then other cultural organisations, venues will benefit from that, because they will use it and they will generate audiences. So really at that point, really sell us and tell us who you are and what you do, and think as broad as you can from there. The other question that we think that you might struggle with is the question asks you about diversity. How will you open up access to new audiences, to non-attending audiences or underrepresented groups? Arts Council is very keen that, because some of the money that they get comes via the National Lottery, that those people who naturally buy a National Lottery ticket every Saturday and hope to win, that those people can get back some of their contribution to the National Lottery by way of access to arts and culture in their local area. So what they want to know here is what role do you play? And probably your strongest card here is talking about what you do in terms of your workforce. It may well be that you have a good mix in your workforce. It may well be that you have a good mix of men and women. It may well be that you have a good mix of ages in there. So you have a programme where you ensure that young talent comes into the business and is trained, excuse me, trained and skilled to be able to take over the roles that some of your older employees are taking on. It could well be that you are particularly linked to a local college, a local training academy, and those kids that are sitting in classrooms or were sitting in classrooms now are coming forward and put ideas into your business. So you are a great way of growing the next generation of people who will work within the cultural sector. Think about where you sit within England. Do you sit in an area where there are levels of high unemployment? So one of the things we were talking to somebody earlier on is they have a number of sites located across the UK, and they have a number of those storage sites. They store equipment, and one of the things that they were saying is the majority of their workforce who work there are young. By their words, they're young lads who wouldn't get employment elsewhere. Some of them have not got much educational background, some of them have not got much in terms of get up and go about them, but what they do is they are absolutely passionate about the music industry, so want to work as part of the music industry. So what you are providing there is you are providing access to employment to people who may well not find employment elsewhere, may not be in employment if it wasn't for you being in the area. And don't forget the contribution there that you make to the local economy. You're putting back, by putting employment into local areas, you are putting back into the local economy. Those employees go and spend in the local shop, they drive to work, they fill up their cars at the local petrol station, they go to the newsagents and get their bar of chocolate on the way into work from there. So it's about, you are part and parcel of putting into that local economy. You are critical to making sure that, oh, I don't know, Bournemouth, a particular part of Bournemouth, that Bournemouth has an economy where young people, older people can get access to work and employment. It may well be that one of the things that you've done is you've been involved in some work, and I was talking to an organisation the other day who, as one of their priorities for the next 3 years, they are working to ensure that the festival sites that they're involved with and the events that they put on through their partner companies are made more accessible. So they are working on ensuring that when a festival is established, and by festival it is a range of different events and opportunities, that those are accessible to disabled people. So they have a local college in the area where there are, it's a local disability college, it's a training college. And what they've done is formed a partnership with that local college to get those local, to get those people to come down and go around the site before it actually opens and say, that works really well, that was terrible, we need to do something about this. So for them, their commitment, they're an events management company, and their commitment is ensuring that they can do all they can to open up and help support more people and more different sorts of people to get access to arts and culture.
Caroline, could I just also say that kind of linking these two elements is where any of your work has been specifically with events that are targeted at some of those new audiences or non-attending audiences. So for instance, if you've done some work with the Diwali festival or a specific festival, again, that kind of covers both areas because there's the cultural significance, but along with that is the diversity. So again, thinking about, as Caroline has said, the partnerships and the support that you've given to the whole range of work that you do.
So it's those kind of areas that you need to think widely about your business and try and you know, this is the kind of thing that you might need to bounce off, spend a bit of time talking to people both in the business and outside of the business. What is it that we can put in this question from there? What answers can we find? You have 350 words, so about 250 words to answer the diversity question. For the cultural significance question, you've got 700, so about 600 words to tell us really why. And the questions there are saying that the bit behind the question is, if at the end of the pandemic, your company had gone bump, hadn't survived, hadn't gone through that period, what gap would you leave? If your answer to that is, well, there's actually 27 of us within a 10-mile radius of here all doing the same thing, then you are going to really struggle to prove a case that you are worth funding over and above everybody else. So you've really got to kind of think about, what is it that we do that if we weren't here, that would mean we wouldn't have access to this particular arts and cultural activity. And I do appreciate that for many of you it is a kind of completely different way of thinking. You do what you do and you do it incredibly well, but it's that line of thinking that you need to be considering on the website, on the application form. I would be saying to you, go and look at, if you can, go and look at the Arts Council has a strategy, and it is about essentially making sure that more people can engage with more types of arts and culture, and that's part and parcel of what's behind some of this work. So it means that you don't have to travel to London to see high quality arts in London theatres or go to London exhibitions. You can go down the road to Plymouth and you can see equally good talent within Plymouth, because there is a very, very vibrant cultural sector. So that's what Arts Council are aiming to achieve, is that the spread and the range of activity is as good wherever you live. So if you lived in Retford in Nottinghamshire, it would be as good as it was if you were living in London, if you can access those. So you've got to really, really think, this is competitive funding, so sell yourselves well. Okay, so when we did this first presentation, and we were foolhardy, I think is the word, foolhardy, in that we thought we might have a couple of inquiries at the end of it from people wanting help and support to do these applications. We have had so many of you come forward that we were offering 2 services there. I think given where we are at the moment in time, we have got more than, and I've had to draft in several other people to help put forward bids on behalf of organisations. The most that we would be able to do is to review an application if you're going to make it, if you're serious about going forward with an application. But I honestly say to you, if you are serious, then you need now to be getting started on it. One of the things that I said last time round is that last time round, in the first round of cultural recovery funding, the support sector organisations got a relatively low share of the money that was available. Whether that is going to change in terms of this round, we don't know. The only thing we know is the Arts Council are saying it is going to be hugely competitive. Last time round they said it's going to be competitive. This time round they're saying it's going to be hugely competitive. So it is that more organisations will not get the money than will actually get the money. And I know that's an awful thing to say to you from there, but please, if you kind of go through those questions, go onto the Arts Council website, look at the webinars, find out more information about it, and hopefully you'll be able to have a go. Right. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at and take some of the questions. I think Nikki's going to come back in. Are you, Nikki?
Hi, you want me to come back in? Okay. I don't know if Vanessa, you want to look through, you've been scanning these questions. I've been capturing them in a
there's been quite a lot
of pick them out because you've got the expertise to know which ones you've already answered.
Right, okay. There's been some questions about people, Caroline, you might know a bit more about this, or it might have to be one we have to refer back to the Arts Council. Organisations that have only registered within the last year or pre-COVID, who won't have those 2 years of accounts as a registered company. So have gone from sole trader to company. I know it says on the guidance that they might be considered, but I'm just wondering if we know what should be uploaded where the accounts are requested, or that is one to go back to the Arts Council.
The steer from the Arts Council is you needed to have registered your accounts on 6th of January this year to actually be eligible, and you need to be able to prove and provide 2 years worth of accounts. in very exceptional circumstances would they consider anything else. And those exceptional circumstances are likely to be where you have a huge kind of credibility record that you can demonstrate that as a sole trader you might have been operating for 20 years as a sole trader and been involved in anything and everything cultural that every one of us have heard about. And you've now taken the decision only recently to become a limited company. So that would be the real exception. The word from Arts Council is that if you haven't been operating as a business for that length of time, then you are unlikely to get a grant from there. Best thing to do with that is go onto the Arts Council and contact them they have a contact button. They're intending and attempting to get back to everybody within I'm going to say within a couple of days. Hopefully they will get back to you.
Okay, there's also been quite a lot of questions about where people show VAT on their cash flow.
Right.
That's a normal, I mean, because people have a cash flow, do they just submit that, including their VAT?
Right, what they're saying to you is in terms of the financial figures, is that they are expecting and anticipating that you will be using their cash flow and their budget templates that sit on the website. The reason, and to put your information into their cash flow and their template. You can change any of the titles that exist within the spreadsheet that is provided for you. Do not change any of the grey fill cells. Don't change those because that's where all the formulas are. But you can change any of the other. So, for example, on the budget, it will say artistic programming. So for you, artistic programming is not something you're going to be including. So you can change that to say equipment hire or whatever it is that relates to your business. What they're saying to you is the figures need to be gross, and you need to show that any of those areas that you will be claiming back from HMRC that you will not be including within your claim should you make it from there on in. So you'll need to take that out of your calculation, and you'll need to put a note at the far end of your cash flow and your budget sheets to say that's what you're intending to do, because they can't pay for anything that you might then reclaim back from HMRC. But they are saying, and the reason they're saying use their template is they anticipate that they could well get thousands of applications. So anything that you can do, anything at all that you can do to show them that to make it easy for them to assess your application. The written side, fine, they're going to see the paper document on there, but on the spreadsheet, the easiest way for them to assess your application is to use a format and a way of explaining the information that they are familiar with. If you provide lots of things that they can't understand or quickly make sense of, then they won't quickly make sense of it given the numbers of applications that could be there. They might miss a key bit of information. 2 tips that they've given out is if you when you use the cash flow or the budget template, if you insert lines, don't insert lines, and this sounds really obvious, but it's an easy thing to do. Don't insert lines at the top or the bottom because it may get missed out of the formula. Stick them in the middle so that you make sure when you're calculating the row, I know it's teaching and grandmothers and sucking eggs and all that, but it tripped loads of people up on the last round. Loads of people missed out on expenditure that was on their spreadsheet from there. The other thing that you need to do, it's just reminded me, if you are going to make an application, you need to provide 2 balance sheets, one at the 31st of December last year and one at the 31st of March, a projected balance sheet for the end of this financial year. What that needs to do is that needs to show the position of the business both in December and what you expect and anticipate at the 31st of March. Those, if you can provide those yourself, do so, but most people are looking for those to come through their accountant to be able to do that and provide that for them. So you will need to upload that information along with your cash flow and your budget template, the 2 balance sheets, and then there is another little bit of information that you need to put in, which is what they're calling a delivery plan. And essentially what you do is you say, in April, I have told you in my budget what I'm going to spend the money on, and then this shows here the delivery, the activity that I am going to do in April that uses and spends that money that's in my budget. So you can look at the budget line and you can see in April £30,000 worth of spend. So in April, what are you spending that money on? You are reserving 20 venues for use in June. So that says reserving 20 venues for use in June, so they can match it up. So you've got to put that together. So again, it's another task that you've got.
We're getting a lot of questions around three key things, which is about the accounts and what needs to be submitted, and what should be in the cash flow. There's a whole question around this 25% and turnover and the additional thing about the 8 weeks reserves. There's also been quite a lot of questions around both the CBIL loans, but also about directors' loans and whether those can be shown as part of the costs.
Right. Okay, let's deal with directors' loans first of all. Directors' loans or dividends. I have got a question into Arts Council to say, how are you dealing with directors' loans and dividends? Like you, I run my own company and I pay myself a minimal amount through PAYE, and at the end of each year, I take out a dividend from there. One of the things that I don't feel that was a consideration that they have given, so they provided no guidance on this whatsoever. To say how they're going to deal with directors' loans or dividends. One of the things that as soon as I get some information on what they're going to do about that, then I will be sending that through to Nikki to get out to everybody from there. I would work on the basis that if you are going to include within your costs for the April, May and June period, if you're going to include your costs for yourself as either a PAYE salary contribution or a dividend, that you put that in, but that has to be realistic and reasonable, looking back at your last 2 or 3 years worth of accounts. So if in the previous financial year that you upload your accounts, your dividend payment came out from there and you took out £50,000 worth of payout the business, if you suddenly go in your application and you ask for £150,000 worth of dividend pay out the business, that will be deemed as being excessive. So you will fail. You will get kicked out at that point from there. So we haven't got a clear steer on that, and I'm still waiting for them to come back and say, this is how we're going to treat directors' loans and dividends. I am sorry, we're in the same situation that you are, trying to find that out. The question about accounts is you need audited accounts to be presented up, and you also need, the other thing is you need your accounts records on Companies House to be up to date. If you're outstanding on those and they do a check on there and you're a consistently late filer from there, then again, the flag will go up and they will think, is this an organisation? Is this a company that is aware of its responsibilities under company law? Is it a company that has a good financial management system around managing and looking after its own resources? So therefore, if we give it public money, is that going to be the best use of public money? So you've got to make sure that your accounts are up to date and filed. If they're not, then you may choose to say this program isn't the program for you, given that it's only a 3-month little window of opportunity to get some money from there. When you put your budget together, your budget for this year, you are working on the basis of using information that the last pre-COVID year, this is what it was like in the last pre-COVID year when we did all the things that we did from there. And what you're saying is, this is what we did, this is the amount of income that we brought in, and this is the amount of activity that we spent. What you've also got to do is be with a degree of realism that actually on the 1st of April, nothing is going to be likely to kick off at the same level as it did pre-COVID. So you have to think, actually, what am I assuming is going to happen? And that's how you construct your budget, and that's how you construct your income. And the gap, as I say, between your operating costs and your profits is the gap that you can apply for from there. What was the question regards turnover?
Well, there's a number of questions. For instance, there's one just come in where the turnover is less than that 100,000, and whether and therefore can they apply, but also where the plus reserves fits within that. So is it 25% and then your reserves would bring you up to that minimum of 25,000? There's quite a lot of small organizations that I think the theme is that, are they precluded from doing this simply because their turnover doesn't reach the 100,000?
Arts Council won't tell you that you are precluded. They won't say if you don't reach the minimum grant level of 25,000, which would be roughly the turnover of 100. If you don't reach that, you're not barred from making an application under this programme. The steer that they are giving is it may well be that this programme is not the right one for you, that there are other opportunities that are available. The kind of feedback that they're giving is if you come in round about 25,000, so whether that's 22, 23, 24,000, whether that's going to be acceptable or not, they're not saying that you can come in if you're coming in at the £22,000 level. What they really want is they really want those organisations that come in above that, and they need you to sit and think and say, is this the right programme for me? If it's a relatively small company, the amount of money that you have coming into the business, what is it that if you've got a particularly strong case, so if you're culturally significant, if you are the only provider of, provider of a particular activity, and you came in under that £25,000 limit, you might have an opportunity. But if you are one of many, if you are one of every single organisation, or there is a whole heap of people who do something similar to you, and you can't get to that minimum 25,000, then I have to say, you're going to be unlikely to get any funding from them. And they will say to you, have you looked at the other strands of lottery funding that is available? So you might choose to go back to the Arts Council, and instead of asking for this money, which is about helping you to prepare for the reopening as it comes in July, they might say to you, you would be better to go in and ask for and apply for a National Lottery Project grant through the Arts Council, where you are asking for money to deliver a programme of activity. And to be honest, if you're at the under 25,000 mark, I would be saying to you, I think that's going to be your better programme.
Mm-hmm. There's quite a lot about not having used or only used part of the CBIL loan, and where that they haven't called down the loan yet. Yeah. So I think we've had this a lot. So, obviously where loans are in place, but not yet either fully or not at all drawn down on.
If you've been drawing down the money, if you've been using that money as you've gone along, if you've used the money totally, you're fine. You can go in without any question. You used the money, you had the loan, you made use of it from there. If you are drawing it down gradually, then provided the steer seems to be, provided you have a plan in place to use that money and you have been using it, then that would be looked on that you have made use of all of the opportunities available to keep the business going without relying on grants from the Arts Council. If what you've done, and I fully appreciate this, because I sit here with money in my business, sitting in the bank, waiting for that rainy day, and I am lucky I don't have the overhead costs that you have. I operate on a very small skin from here. If what you've done is you've saved that loan, you've got that loan out and you've put it away for the rainy day, if you've got a real, an identifiable reason why you've done that, so you have a specific and particular thing that you are going to use that money on, then that would be an explanation and a way of you saying, I have saved this money because in March of this year, or in March of this year, I am going to use that money to do X and Y and Z at the point when you've made the application. If what you're doing is you're saying, I have that money and I'm sitting with it in my back pocket, again, that question, the question from the Arts Council, and it's a question that they are being asked to ask, is if you needed the money to keep the business going and you haven't used it, you didn't need the money to keep the business going, and therefore you may not need the grant to keep the business going because you have other resources that you can rely on. It's a really difficult thing, and it's the same. I suppose the argument is the kind of the parallel argument would be around the Marks and Spencers, the Asdas, the Aldi, who all had the furlough scheme for staff. They furloughed staff and they had the money, and then what happened in that instance was the public turned around and said, hang on a minute, I don't think that's really right if you're then paying out director salaries and dividends and whatever else from there. So the Arts Council are kind of caught in that sort of discussion that's going on about, and as I said to somebody the other day, the decision is entirely a personal decision that each business will take. And there is no right to say you should have had the grant and you should have used the grant, the loan, rather you should have had the grant, the loan and used it and spent it all because that's what you needed to do. There is no more sense in that than a business saying, well, we had the loan and we've kept it. There's no right or wrong. We've all made decisions about what we do. The unfortunate position is you've got to justify to the Arts Council why you are asking for a grant when at the same time you are sitting on £150,000 worth of loan funding. Now, somebody said to me this morning, what should I do? Should I hand back the loan and apply for the grant? And I said to them, given the fact that the numbers of organisations that are coming forward, it's not just you, i.e. the commercial sector, that are coming forward for this grant, it is all the non-profits that are also coming forward for this grant. Given that it's going to be very competitive, strategically, that business decision can only be made by you. What do I think is going to be the best in the interest? And unfortunately, you know yourself, you will make the decision and you might make the right decision and you might hand the loan back, apply for the grant and get it. You might hand the loan back, apply for the grant and not get it. So you've got to weigh up what you think. And it's really about, in that instance, what you're looking at is how strong is the case that I have for money from the Arts Council? Am I absolutely going to get this money from the Arts Council? Or am I one of lots of organisations that are doing brilliant work, really, really great work, employing lots of people, doing lots of great cultural activities, supporting all the rest of the sector, but actually I don't really know that I'm hand on heart, am I actually going to get this money? So that must be your decision.
Okay, I think there's been a question about capital. It's quite clear in the guidance that capital has to be COVID related. So if you're looking at any capital expenditure, it's expenditure that you need to meet, say, COVID restrictions or changes to equipment that you have, not new capital expenditure. The Arts Council currently, I think Caroline, I'm right in saying this, does not have a capital fund for new capital at all.
It's closed at the moment.
It has to be COVID related.
Yeah. But what you can do is your argument can be that what you've done is you've invested in capital to help you deliver what you think the new you is going to be, what the new you is for the business from there. So, and that's a good thing. That's a good point that you've just raised there, Vanessa, is one of the things that they don't want to see you doing is, given that it's a 3-month programme, they don't want to see you saying, well, previously we were this, but actually, during the 3-month period, we're going to move around and we're going to completely refocus and start all sorts of new activity in new areas, with new markets, with new customers, with new businesses, because they will say that is a significant business risk. The likelihood of you being able to successfully transition from your current market sector that you're in with your current customer base into the new one, given where we are now and given what we think might happen, that is going to be unlikely to happen. So that indicates flags a big risk. So they'll say, no, we're not going to fund that. So be warned, do not kind of try and think about reinventing yourself. If you've been reinventing yourself during the period, so I was talking to somebody the other day, and as part of their events management company, they started a second wing, which was a brewing business. And what they've done is, because they know that when they go to their events, they can also offer that when we get out of this mess to their clients as an added value service. And what they're saying is, how much of that brewing business could we include costs for? And I said very, very little. Very little, because it's going to be one of those difficult areas for the Arts Council to balance. We could put a small amount of cost in, but not a significant amount of cost in. But the reason they're going to include some of the cost is because they've already had that brewing business. They've been working on it. They started working on it in summer of last, and when the lockdown eased in gosh, I can't remember when it is, in the kind of pre-Christmas time, when they went to their events, they added that a couple of their events and used that as part and parcel of their offer to their customers. So they have a track record. They can say, we've already done it, we know it works, we've tested it, it's not an expense on the business.
Okay, I think that's most of the general themes. I've answered quite a few on what can and can't be included. I think, Nikki, do we want to open it up now to general questions?
Obviously, there's a lot of you on here, so we can't see people. So if you can just respect if somebody has a question, a verbal question to ask, please do, and we'll just see who it is. So if you can just sort of shout out one at a time, because I can't see everyone. I can see Sarah Cleve, so you can start off. You're on mute, Sarah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. I thank you so much. It's been really informative. I have been floating between the two worlds of the loans I thought were available, which was this one or the develop your own creative practice. This one is absolutely suitable for me. I fit all the criteria, but my earnings are slightly lower. So I had a very successful business in the events industry, and I've relocated the space into being a local arts hub and engagement centre, a local business pop-up place. It's all been going well, but I just cannot keep my overheads going at this point, and I'm needing a bit of support in how to have a virtual audience and live streaming as a backdrop in case I can't get the actual numbers through. And it's all been very successful, but my average income before was at about 60k. So I think I don't suit the develop your own creative practice because it's not personal to me. I'm managing a lot of local things, but my earnings aren't high enough to apply for this. So it looks like my golden one is the National Lottery Project grant. That should be what I should be looking into potentially instead of this one.
I think you're going to find that would be the one. What you've got to do with a project grant, though, is you've got to put together, and it is about a project to deliver something.
Yeah.
So what you might choose to do is you might choose to use your activity and think of it as a pilot. One of the things they will fund is you to trial pilot activity. How do I understand the marketplace that I'm now having to work in? What do I know about it? What don't I know? So you might be best to look at that.
Absolutely, thank you. I think that sounds the right one for me. So that's great.
And I think the other thing, Sarah, is to emphasize that you established this, due to COVID, but actually you want to develop that further.
It's been overwhelmingly successful, and it's something that I'm very happy without, despite COVID now, to not return to my original job role, but actually continue this growing no matter what happens. So I think that would be really useful.
Okay, somebody's just come in and asked a question about could you use the CRF to pilot activity, and I would warn you against doing that to any great degree, because I think what they're wanting to do is they're wanting for you to transition your business as it stands into the new opening, rather than try. And this is not necessarily for you, Sarah, but it's for the person on it flicked up and disappeared, so I can't remember your name. But what they're wanting you to do is transition your business rather than you take out. You've got to weigh it up. It's always about risk. If I try something new and it goes well, brilliant. But if I try something new and it doesn't go and I go under, then for ACE point of view, that would be a business that has not succeeded and not gone through from there. The other thing is, sorry, Vanessa, and then I'll shut up a minute. Somebody put up a question about the ACE webinars. At the very bottom on the Cultural Recovery Fund information page on the ACE website, right down at the very bottom, there are 3 buttons that you can click on, the 3 recordings that have taken place. And those are full of people like you who sat there, and there are hundreds of questions that people have asked. Unfortunately, you don't get to see the questions. Somebody's dog's just come into view on the bottom left on page 1. You don't get to see the questions. What you get to see is you get to hear the responses, but it may well be that some of the things you've got questions on, somebody else has asked during one of those 3 seminars. So I'd advise you all to go and have a look at that.
Yeah, I think the key thing about this second round is it's talking about transition. The first round was very much about survival. This is transition. So clearly, where if you're cultural, answering the cultural significance is about work that you would be doing or partnerships that you are looking at that meet that, that's future activity, but it's about the transition, the fact that you need to stay business continuity. Oh, hello. Business continuity in order to ensure that you can be part of that future activity.
Okay, is there any other questions?
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
On the 1st of March, I took a limited company partner on, and he was freelance, and he was planning on investing obviously all his wages into my company. At that point, obviously we didn't know that obviously COVID was going to kick off until the 23rd. So we hit the VAT threshold on the 1st of March as well. So the plan was obviously take all his money and invest it through all his work. But I don't obviously know now. I've been paying everything as like my wages and his wages all the way up to this point and keeping the company going. Obviously we might fall short of the 25,000, but now I've got this extra person who I probably, you know, he would have brought another £50,000 worth of work if it was a normal year, and I'd fall higher. So I just don't know where I would stand, if you understand me.
I think that they're going to look at what you've been doing previously, and I think historically that you're going to find when you put your you have registered accounts, do you, for the last couple of years? Yeah,
I'm all up to date, and I did it well in advance.
So what they will do is, as part of the assessment criteria, is they will look at your registered accounts and see those and see that you've been operating well below the level at which the 25,000 grant kicks in. So you're probably going to find, even though you've now got different costs in this year, you're going to find that I think you're going to find it difficult to prove the case that actually you are meeting their minimum threshold from there.
Okay, thank you.
But that's not to say you may choose, you know, you've got to kind of have a think about it. But I think you've got to, and what I was saying to somebody the other day, we think that at the moment in time that for every 1 application that is successful, there could be somewhere in the region of 20, 25 applications that are unsuccessful. So it is that way up about how much do I think I'm going to put in for essentially, and I know for some of you the way it will be, it's 3 months worth of money. For some of you it will be 3 months worth of money that I haven't had anything up until now, so God, I really need it. But actually the amount of work that you're going to have to do to get that money to actually secure that, you may well say, do you know what, I'm just not going to move forward on this. It just doesn't, there's too many questions for me, there'll be too many questions for them.
Okay, anybody else have a question?
Yes, please. Can I come in?
Yes, of course, Roddy.
We, like a lot of micro businesses, only file sort of minimum accounts at Companies House. Although we're well within the turnover criteria for this scheme, our accounts are not externally audited. Does this matter?
As long as they're registered, I think they would be fine, wouldn't they, Caroline?
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of smaller companies will have unaudited accounts, but as long as they're registered, and they have been registered by the 6th of January, yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else for a question? Jennifer, you had your hand up.
Hi, just a very quick question. The 25%, I just need to clarify, is that for turnover? So total income of grants, sales, anything else?
Yeah.
It's not expenditure. It's actual sales income.
Yeah. That's what
Okay.
they've said, that they anticipate it would be 25% of your turnover. So obviously they're looking at sustainability and continuity of the business.
Yeah.
That's why
Okay.
they see your balance sheet and your cash flow as well.
Okay, thank you.
Going back to the question on the reserves, the key information there is that the reserves figure is included within the application that you put in. You will put it in as part of your total grant that you apply for. So if you are putting in for a contribution to reserves, it will go as part of your total project, your total application amount from there. It's not kind of roughly, and don't think what you're not applying for is 25% of your turnover, therefore I can go ahead and get that. It's only, you can only apply for those areas of your expenditure that are eligible under this scheme. So previously you may well have had huge amounts of staffing that put you in that level from there, but actually under this scheme you will only be able to count in, if it's paid members of staff, for those 2 months when you'll actually be able to include them. So you won't have that third month of April in there. So you've got to really think about what you're putting in. Is the expenditure that you're asking for, is it eligible under the scheme, and can you get it to put in for the scheme? Can you include it from there? Again, there's more information on that on the Arts Council website.
Okay, I've had Maria Wallace, you've asked for a question. Maria?
Hi there. Yes, thank you. It's not for myself, so I don't, I kind of smaller operator and all this, but for a family member who couldn't be here at this time today. So he's freelance sound engineer who runs his business as a single direct company. Obviously working in live sound, and obviously has been totally annihilated in terms of his business in 2020. Now, my specific question, I suppose, like many people, he hadn't even considered that this funding could be open to him, but I've been encouraging him to look into it. My particular question is that I encouraged him to apply for the DYCP grant, which he did do and was successful in being granted a small grant there to do developing his work into recorded sound. So that's for a specific project. Do you know whether there's a kind of a technical question about the Arts Council, and Grantium, as that, because we didn't even know about any of this, he put himself as like an individual on that application, but does that mean he's now forever after an individual on ACE's system and you can't go in and be a company? And so
that's a question again there. That's a question for Arts Council. If he's down as an individual, they will need to amend the record to change it to an organisation. So you'll need to get
just to come in on that. I recently asked Arts Council the same question, and I have managed, and they said I can apply for both. So I can apply for an Arts Council grant, a CRF grant as an organisation, and a DYCP grant as an individual. And I have managed to create 2 applicant profiles within my Grantium account.
I'll ring you back. Okay.
Thanks, Jake. That's really useful.
With regards for anybody who is operating as a single, you can hold, one of the things that you can do is talking there about multiple grants. You could hold a developing your creative practice grant and a CRF grant. You can also hold a project grant, a National Lottery project grant, which the maximum is 100,000 alongside a CRF application. But you can't claim, the thing that you cannot do in those is you can't claim the same areas of expenditure in both applications. Yeah. So if in your DYCP DYIC grant and your National Lottery project grant, you can't claim for expenditure that you've also put into your CRF grant. You have to put in other things, but it does give you, for some of the smaller providers in the marketplace, the opportunity to potentially seek 2 lots of funding for the project or for your organisation from there. Somebody's just asked, and I'm going to leap in on this, if you bring your staff back on flexible furlough in March, can you claim the salary in April, May and June? Yes, you can do. If they're back in the business, then that's fine. They're in and they are a legitimate cost. Okay. You need to make a note of that in your form, that's what you're doing. in terms of in your spreadsheet that that's what you're intending to do, and you need to kind of put an assumption about what you expect, why you expect you're going to be bringing them back in at that point in time. So, you know, you imagine that the sales department is going to be fully operational, so you need your key people on the phones or whatever it is from there.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I can't
Can
see.
I jump back into reserves quickly? Sorry. So with the reserves, if I say, for example, I'm going to put in a 25k grant to cover eligible expenditure, and then I'm left with give or take 6 to 8 weeks of reserves, can I just not apply for the reserves and only apply for the 25 grand?
Yeah, you don't have to put reserves in. You don't have to include a reserves contribution in your bid. You can do if you want to. It's something that they're giving you the opportunity to do so, but only if you want to. Because,
for example, if I was to get the grant and not take the reserves, I would be all right. But if I was to get nothing, then things would be looking dicey. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. I think what they're looking for, Jake, is that people have, whether it's they already have it or through this grant, that 2 months worth of reserves in place, which is what they're supporting on this, rather than it's just what those 3 months will cost you and you don't have any reserves should things continue or there be a reduction in your activity following June.
Great, thanks very much. Thank you.
As I said before, in relation to reserves, ACE work on the basis for not-for-profit organisations that they would hold as part of their business. They would likely hold 9 months reserves to meet the operating costs of the business from there. So there is an argument to say that any organisation can look to build up 9 months reserves, because that would give you time to potentially, if you had that level of reserve, it could give you time to maybe try out some new things, to change the business focus slightly, to look at reducing the cost or making some changes to the business. So therefore that's why they allow you to include a reserve contribution, because obviously what they don't want to do is make an investment in a business that 3 or 4 or 5 months later disappears. That might happen, but they're trying to prevent that happening, because they're trying to use the money that they've got to keep you sustainable for the next, to get to the point where in July, when, as I say, everything opens, we can all go back to doing what we did.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, Steve Allen, yeah.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say I've watched 3 of these and this has been the most informative so far. So thank you very much for that. I know you've touched on it slightly, reference the bounce back loan. My company will survive the assumption period, the March to June, with my bounce back loan. But then obviously this is going to be a very slow start. If we do get a start at all in June, it's going to be very, very slow. So I'm really going to struggle after that. But the period that they want to be covered, the assumption period, I will cover that with my bounce back loan. So have you got any advice how I should approach this?
It's quite difficult, because the argument that they are putting at the moment is that because you have that money readily available, that for them would be the first set of money that they would see you as needing to use, because it's readily available. Because if they give you, for example, £50,000, that means they don't have £50,000 to give to another business.
No, I get that, but it will be looking at the forecast. It will draw down literally the week before the end of June. Literally, it will be gone. So with all the overheads, it will be gone. So I'm not asking for money that I don't.
Sorry,
I don't require.
Sorry, I misunderstood your question. So you have a bounce back loan, and in your cash flow forecast at the moment, by the end of June, you will have completed the drawdown on that from there. Yeah. So you can demonstrate within that you are showing that you are using that bounce back loan, you are using it, so therefore it is no longer available to you. So that is that you are you have made use of the resources that you've been provided to sustain the company from there on in.
But it will get me to the assumption period that they're asking to cover. It
Yeah.
will do that. That's my dilemma.
Right. So the difficulty that we've got from them is we haven't got a very clear steer at the moment on what they're going to do about people who choose to delay use of the bounce back loan or have taken out a very late bounce back loan. So we've got people who have literally only just kind of received their bounce back loans from those, and people are saying they would not have gone for a bounce back loan had they known that this program was available. The only thing I can say on that is I've got a question into them around the whole nature of bounce back loans. There is so little information that they provided, and as soon as I hear anything, I'll go to Nikki and she can get it out to everybody to try and advise you. I think you're just going to have to take a decision on whether you say, I'm going to use my bounce back loan, and on top of that, there is other levels of expenditure that I have that I'm going to try and claim for, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to delay use of some of the bounce back loan to hold me on, because my assumption is that July onwards isn't going to be kind of as fruitful as we think it might well be from there.
I think we all know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair to ACE, when they were doing the one presentation that I watched, they just felt it was really difficult when they were talking about the thought that we would all be reopening to a new normal in July. They know themselves that this is probably a very ambitious target. It is a target that has come from the government because they're saying what we have is we have a vaccine program in place, so therefore it will be rolling out from there. Their hands are very much tied on this one.
All right, thank you.
Can we go? Thank you, Steve. Can we go to Peter, please? I think he had his hand up.
I'm going to clarify the £100,000 again, because I'm still a bit confused. So our turnover pre-COVID was about £85,000. So we're probably borderline whether we get it or not. But are we claiming for our turnover divided by 4 or our costs? Because that's going to be a lot less than 25,000. Does that make sense?
Yes. If what you've done is your turnover is less than 25,000, then you're going to find it difficult to go in. You're going to be slightly under the level from there. If you can make a great case about the other areas and you can demonstrate that you are culturally, the real question that they're saying for supplier organisations, really what they're going to judge, the main bit that they're going to judge you on is actually what do you do that keeps the cultural economy going? How critical or pivotal are you to that? And if you can demonstrate that you've got a really good case in that respect, then they might be prepared to give you a little bit of leeway over the entry level on the minimum grant. But if you're, as I say, if you're one of a number of suppliers doing a very, there are lots of people doing it like you, and particularly if in your area there are several of you in that field, then you will find it very difficult to stand. You are attempting to stand out. You're trying to be a poppy in a field of poppies. That's the only thing I can say.
No, I be claiming call it 80,000. Should I be claiming £20,000 or my costs for that quarter? That's my question.
It's the cost. I think what's important is that they say that they're making an assumption that it will be 25% because it represents the first quarter of a financial year. But obviously, when you do that, when you look at the eligible costs that you might incur in that period, given that not every quarter is the same, that quarter may be a higher quarter for you. Yeah, and it's talking about transition. So you may have, for instance, in there is the COVID related costs. You wouldn't have had that in a previous financial. So I do think, Caroline, I don't know if you agree that if you get too caught up on the 25%, it's not actually looking at what your costs might be in that quarter to make sure that you're ready to go to start the business up and get it going at what they had assumed, and they didn't see the second lockdown coming, would be a start to do business as normal. So we all know that in any financial year, in the cash flow, and that's where your cash flow might show that at that period of the year is where your highest costs are, because you're taking on new staff. You're going to have to look at what COVID capital costs you might need to make that would not normally be there. So I think it's as much what will it cost you in that period to be ready to restart your business and keep your business going.
The way to look at it is put your budget together, and what you do is you look at what you're looking for is you're looking for the gap between the income that you bring in and your operating costs, and that's the bit really that you're looking to ask them to fund for that 3-month period. And that's the bit where they are expecting, as Vanessa has said there, they're expecting that most organisations who will require and use this funding are likely to come in at the kind of turnover level of about 100,000. Everybody else, they're probably working on the assumption that you might be a really, really tiny organisation and might have been able to have downsized to the point of whatever. It might be that you're operating with so few costs attached to the business, so you're operating like I do off the kitchen table from there. So it's really about sustaining some of those businesses, and this is where it does get very difficult for those very small businesses within the sector. And there are, a lot of the businesses within the sector are at the really tiny end. They're not the major megas. They are 2 or 3 people who have cobbled together a bit of money and are doing something and doing it very well. But it's that bit from there. So it's really, think about it, it's the income gap that you've got between what you're likely to bring in and what you're likely to spend, and that gap there is the bit that they're going to fund for you. But if you make that calculation and you find your income gap there is £3,000, £4,000, £5,000, £10,000, it is unlikely that you're going to get a grant. If that income gap is 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, those are the grants. So last time round, the minimum grant that they gave out was 50,000. And again, for lots of organisations, that sounds, for some of the smaller organisations, that was for 6 months. That was 25,000 that they looked at over this period. And lots of organisations just couldn't meet that because they don't spend at that level.
And obviously, a lot of costs for companies like us, events companies, are only incurred if we're doing events. So again, it's complicated. We might bring in freelancers, obviously got fuel costs to go to events, other things. So again, it's quite tricky to work out what that cash flow might be.
Difficult thing is, what you have to do is you have to put yourself in the assumptions that ACE have made. Don't forget the assumption that they are making is that we will spend April getting ready to open. In May, we'll do a little bit more ready to open. In June, we'll do a little bit more again to open, and in July we will open. So that's the assumption. So if what you do when you put your cash flow together is you use their assumption, that's what they're asking you to do. So you are assuming that the events that you put together would start to take place in July onwards. So in April you're going to have costs, in May you're going to have costs, and June. The fact that, and it's almost like we're in a parallel world. The fact that there is another Zoom going on where everybody's going, we are never going to open back in July. Forget that. We all know that is probably what's going to happen. But for this programme for ACE money, you work on the basis that what you're going to do is you're going to open up and you are going to start to get ready for July, August, September, and it will all start to rise from there. So that's the thinking. Get in there kind of headspace and think like that, rather than, well, I know that's not going to happen, I know that's not going to happen. What would normally happen in your normal business? So if normally you were at 3 festivals that took place in July, August and December, then that's the planning that you need to think about doing now for those 3 events that would take place. The fact that they may or may not take place, we can't control the future. That's how they're positioning this fund of money. I don't know whether that kind of makes it feel a little bit more like, yes, we might be able to.
Helpful, I think, for a lot of people, I think, to understand that. I've got a question from Gary Churchill, who's asked to.
Hello. Hi there. Thank you, Caroline. It's been fantastically insightful. So I have 17 to 20 years of successful business, files for Companies House. That's great. And then in 2020, last year, we closed one company, my lighting company, for an IML, and I started up a management company. So that management company is just about to submit its latest set of accounts, this was a draft set of accounts. So I'm really in a massive limbo position. I tick all the boxes under my old company, but my new company with a draft set of accounts, which is, we're looking at that as the umbrella company, as you like. is it worth my time? Am I going to be wasting my time submitting my application?
One of the things that they have said is, like as you've demonstrated there, is where you have a track record of and you've changed the company structure or you've changed the operating of the business. Was it directly in response to COVID? If it was directly in response to the crisis in which we find ourselves, then you can construct an argument that says, in response to, rather than losing the company or losing everything that I built up over the last 20 odd years, I reformulated, restructured, and this is the way that we went forward from here on in. So you might prove to be, I don't know whether he's just dropped off.
I think he's dropped, but he can finish it off because he can listen to the recording.
Yeah, that might prove to be the example. They have said that they will look at some of those examples where things like that have happened as exceptions rather than normal. The best thing I would advise in that point is drop an email through the Arts Council website to them and say, this is my position, I did this, this is what's happened, can I apply? And they will give you a steer from what they think at their end. Okay,
thank you. I'm afraid that's all the questions that we have time for, but we have captured a lot of your questions in the chat as well. So there's a huge amount. I think you had something like over 80 questions coming through. So we'll try and look at if we can do some themes at some point, but I don't think that will be coming out this afternoon. But certainly we have the other questions from the other one that we did on Wednesday. So I hope that's really helped you guys. I'd like to say a massive thank you to both Caroline and to Vanessa for their help, and I hope it's been really, really useful for you guys. So we will get this evening, we'll try and get out to you the recording and the slides so you can at least have a look if you want to over the weekend, as we said. Any other follow-ups, Caroline will obviously contact me and we'll get anything out to you up until the point that she mentioned. I think we can't stress enough, if you haven't registered on the Grantium site, you must do that. So just do that, and even if you do your application later, make sure you've done that. I think that's really important, isn't it? Otherwise you're not going to get on there. And really it was just to say thank you so much for your time. We are doing another session, Brexit, another theme for us all. Brexit rears its head. So we've got a Brexit session, which is for those people that are involved in goods, introduction to classification of goods, and that's on next Tuesday the 19th. And there's also some, again, some free sessions that we'll be doing coming up as well on trademarks, hopefully on something on transport, and also UKCA. We're trying to find someone for UKCA at the moment, but of course it's a very new thing. This is to do with trademarks and CE marking. So please let us know if there is something on Brexit you think would be really useful as well. And we hope that you've enjoyed this session and it's helped you. That's the most important thing. And again, just to say a big thank you to all of you and to our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody. Good luck.
Well done.
Okay, can I just end by saying that I know me and Vanessa's hold this both, is that the arts and cultural sector would not be anything without all of the organisations like you. And I think that this is the bit that we said last time around, is you are pivotal to the delivery of fantastic arts and cultural events. And I look forward to the day when I can go to something and meet one of you, having provided whether it's the staging, the sound, the lighting, or the digital interaction from there. And good luck, best of luck, get through it as we can, because we need you.
We do.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.